Welcome all of you. This is the e-content developed for Department of Collegiate and Technical Education as part of the LMS program for the subject Engineering Physics. Engineering Physics has five modules in it. We will be looking at the third module, which deals with Maxwell's equations. The syllabus of this chapter asks us to study the fundamentals of vector calculus. Here we need to review the fundamentals of vector calculus and understand the concept of divergence and curl of electric field and magnetic field, prove the Gauss divergence theorem, mention the Stokes theorem, and study the laws of electrostatics, magnetism, and Faraday's law of EMI, and finally derive the expression for displacement current with the help of equation of continuity. We'll look at things in detail. Expected outcome of the course. After completion of this chapter, we should be in a position to appreciate the essence of field concept in electromagnetism and derive the Maxwell's equations and understand the wave propagation of electromagnetic waves. What are Maxwell's equations? Maxwell's equations are a series of four partial differential equations that describe the forces of electromagnetism. They were derived by physicist and mathematician James Clerk Maxwell in 1861 and in 1862. The four equations are Gauss law for electrostatics, Gauss law for magnetism, Faraday's law, and Ampere-Maxwell's law. These are the four Maxwell's equations. What is the significance of Maxwell's equations? Maxwell's equations demonstrate how the fluctuating electric and magnetic fields propagate at constant speed, which we now today know as electromagnetic radiation. In fact, electromagnetic radiation is comprising of fluctuating electric and magnetic fields, and they are moving with constant speed, was inferred from the Maxwell's equations. That is the significance of Maxwell's equations. Before going to the Maxwell's equations, we will try to look at the evolution of electrostatics and magnetism together. In 1780s, Coulomb's law of electrostatics had been established. I hope all of you are familiar with the basic laws of electrostatics. It simply says that when two charges are interacting with each other, the force of interaction is proportional to the magnitude of the product of charges and inversely proportional to the square of the distance. Suppose there are two positive charges, then they will be repelling with each other, and suppose there are two positive charges or two negative charges, that is a pair of like charges will be repelling each other and a pair of unlike charges will be attracting each other. In our representation, we have Q1 and Q2 and Q1 and minus Q2. We can see that Q1 and Q2 are repelling each other and Q1 and minus Q2 are attracting with each other. But the magnitude of force of interaction is same. It is proportional to product of the charges and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between the two. So this was established in 1780s. Later in 1820, Hans Christian Ørsted accidentally discovered the magnetic effect of electric current. In his experimental setup, he found that when the magnetic compass was kept in the vicinity of a conductor carrying current, the magnetic compass deflected. We can see the setup in the diagram here. We have conductor AB placed on a wooden support. When current flows through the conductor AB, then the magnetic compass, which is kept near to that, get deflected. Why the magnetic compass get deflected? To reason out this one, Ørsted suggested that a current carrying conductor is generating a magnetic field around it, and this magnetic field is interacting with the compass magnet and disturbing it. So it gets deflected. So basically, the current carrying conductor creates a magnetic field around it. This was established in 1820. In 1823, Ampere further investigated this Ørsted experiment, and he was able to deduce that a pair of conductors carrying current and if the current is flowing in the same direction, they will get attracted with each other, attracted towards each other. And if the current direction is opposite, they get repelled with each other. So that this is called Ampere's force law. So Ampere found that when two conductors carrying current, they get two conductors carrying current in the same direction, they get attracted towards each other. And when they are carrying current in opposite direction, they repel each other. So this is called Ampere's force law. This is again magnetic effect of electric current. And later in 1825, Ampere further calculated the total magnetic field generated because of the current flowing through the conductor. Suppose you can refer our diagram here. Suppose we have a conductor carrying current I, then the total magnetic field around is indicated by this concentric loops here. The magnetic field generated is equal to mu naught times I. The total magnetic field generated around a current carrying conductor will be equal to mu naught times I. Mu naught is the permeability of the medium. I is the strength of the current flowing in the conductor. The total magnetic field generated can be described in terms of the line integral as integral of B dot dl. Integral of where B is the magnetic field intensity at any point on the loop. You can refer the second diagram here. We have a circular loop, and then B is the magnetic field intensity at a point with the length dl. So the total magnetic field around the circular loop will be equal to B dot dl. If we integrate this B dot dl over the entire loop, that gives us the total magnetic field. So this is the Ampere circuital law. I repeat once again, Ampere circuital law helps us to find the total magnetic field generated around a current carrying conductor. The total magnetic field generated will be equal to mu naught times the strength of the current flowing through the conductor. If I is the strength of the current, then the total magnetic field is equal to mu naught times I. The total magnetic field can be described for circular loops. It need not be a circular loop always. It can be of any shape, any contour. But the total magnetic field can be defined as the line integral of magnetic field intensity at a point integrated over the entire loop. So this is Ampere's circuital law. Further, Michael Faraday discovered the electromagnetic induction through his experiments. All of us are familiar with what is electromagnetic induction. Electromagnetic induction basically means that whenever magnetic lines of forces are intercepted by a conductor, in the conductor, EMF is set up and that drives the current. We can refer our diagram here. Here we have a coil which is carrying current and generating a magnetic field. The magnetic field is given by or shown by the green lines here. That is the magnetic field lines. These magnetic lines of force, when intercepted by a coil which is connected to an ammeter, the EMF is set up in the coil and that drives the current. That current is shown on the ammeter. So the concept here is when magnetic lines of forces are intercepted by a conductor, then EMF is set up in that conductor and the current is driven. So this is Michael Faraday's observation. Later, here Michael Faraday was able to establish the fact that there is current generated when the magnetic lines of forces are intercepted by the conductor. But what is the direction of the current? What is the direction with respect to the field? This he could not identify. But later, Neumann studied further on his induction effect and he was able to identify the direction of the induced current with respect to the change in the direction of the magnetic field. So we had a complete understanding of electromagnetic induction effect. So now When we look at all these developments from 1780s with the Coulomb law, starting with the Coulomb's law, we have a set of information here, but all these experimental results were not well organized, and sometimes it was confusing to the scientist. It did not give an overall picture. So a comprehensive summary of the electrodynamics principle was the urgent need at that time. So Maxwell, looking at all these developments, integrated the pre-existing knowledge and gave a set of laws, which included the Oersted law, the Faraday effect, and Ampere's circuital law. Combined together, he formulated a set of laws. These set of laws were mathematical laws, were about 20 in number, and these were called Maxwell's equations. But later, Oliver Heaviside, who further worked upon these Maxwell's equations, made use of the vector calculus and reduced the 20 Maxwell's equation into just 4 mathematical equations, which we now regard today as the Maxwell's equations, or the popularly called 4 Maxwell's equations. And the beauty of these equations is these 4 equations describe all known macroscopic electromagnetic phenomena and have not required any updates till the present day. Maxwell's theoretical work was based on empirical observations by Michael Faraday and others. That we should remember, that Maxwell's theoretical work was based on the empirical observations made by Michael Faraday, Ampere, and others preceding Maxwell. So again, we come back to the question, what are Maxwell's equations? Maxwell's equations are a set of 4 partial differential equations that describe the laws of electromagnetism. The 4 laws of magnetism were the 20 equations originally derived by Maxwell and truncated into just 4 by Oliver Heaviside. So the 4 equations are Gauss law for electrostatics, Gauss law for magnetism, Faraday's law, and Ampere's law, also called as Ampere-Maxwell law because it was modified later by Maxwell. So these are the 4 Maxwell's equations. So let us try to discuss one by one in our further interactions. So far, we have looked at the evolution of Maxwell's equations and the events that led to the formulation of Maxwell's equations. Let us continue with the revision of fundamentals of vector calculus. What is a vector? All of us know a vector is a physical quantity which has both magnitude as well as direction. These vectors can be multiplied with each other, or added with each other, or subtracted with each other. The addition and subtraction we are not looking here. We will look at the multiplication of vectors. Vectors can be multiplied in 2 ways. 2 vectors, when multiplied, it may give us a scalar quantity. It is called scalar multiplication of vectors, or scalar product, or dot product of 2 vectors. So what is a scalar product of 2 vectors? 2 vectors, when multiplied with each other, giving us a scalar quantity, is called scalar multiplication or scalar product of 2 vectors. Suppose vector A and vector B are 2 vectors. Suppose there is an angle theta between the 2 vectors, then the dot product of these 2 vectors is defined as A dot B is equal to modulus of vector A into modulus of vector B, that is magnitude of vector A into magnitude of vector B into cosine of the angle between the 2 vectors. This is defined. This is the scalar product of 2 vectors. Suppose the vectors are represented in its component form. We can see here vector A is equal to Ax I cap plus Ay j cap plus Az z cap, and vector B is equal to Bx I cap plus By j cap plus Bz z cap. Then the dot product or scalar product is given by vector A dot B is equal to Ax Bx plus Ay By plus Az Bz. So in component form, it is expressed like this. Vector A dot vector B is equal to summation of their products. of the components. If A and B, vector A and vector B are orthogonal vectors, that is, if they're perpendicular to each other, then theta will be equal to 90 degree, cos 90 is equal to 0. Therefore, product of two vectors turns out to be 0. What is the example for a scalar product? Work done is the best example for the scalar product of two vectors. We know how work done is defined. Work done is defined as the product of force and displacement. Force is the vector quantity, displacement is the vector quantity, but the work done is a scalar quantity. So work can be, suppose F is the force, magnitude of the force, and D. Suppose F is the vector representing the force and D is the vector representing the displacement, then work will be equal to F dot D, or it is equal to Fd cos theta, where theta is the angle between the line of action of the force and the displacement. So work done will be equal to Fd cos theta. This is the scalar product of, this is an example for the scalar product of two vectors. Vector product. If the product of two vectors gives back a vector quantity, then such a multiplication of vectors is called vector multiplication or vector product, or also the cross product of two vectors. If vector A and vector B are the two vectors, then the cross product of two vectors is defined as vector A modulus of vector A modulus of vector B into sine of the angle between the two vectors. So A cross B is equal to AB sine theta. But this is a vector quantity, we should indicate the direction. So to take care of that, we put n cap. This n cap points in the direction of the resultant vector. So what is the direction of the resultant vector? That can be found from the right hand screw rule. Suppose, refer this diagram. Here we have vector A and vector B, and theta is the angle between the two vectors. So cross product of two vectors is vector A cross vector B. The direction of this vector will be in a direction in which you turn a screw from vector A to vector B. Then the direction in which the screw moves ahead is the direction of the resultant vector. I repeat, suppose vector A and vector B are the two vectors, then the cross product of these two vectors will be equal to AB sine theta. The direction of this resultant vector is given by right hand screw rule. Suppose if you hold a screw at the junction of two vectors, and if you turn your screw in such a way as to move from A to B in the right hand direction, then the direction in which the screw advances gives us the direction of the resultant vector. So here, suppose I place a screw here and turn it from A to B, then the screw moves ahead in the screw advances in the upward direction. So this is the direction of the resultant of two vectors, that is the cross product of two vectors. If vector A is expressed in its component form, then it appears as Ax I cap plus Ay j cap plus Az z cap. Similarly, vector B can be expressed in its component form as Bx I cap plus By j cap plus Bz z cap. Then the cross product can be evaluated with the help of a determinant. Vector A cross vector B is equal to, the first row will be the unit vectors along each vector, each direction. Then in the second row, we'll write the components of the first vector. In the third row, we'll write the components of the second vector. If you evaluate this determinant, this gives us a vector, a resultant vector. The direction, as I said, can be determined from the right hand screw rule. So this gives us the vector product of two vectors. I repeat, if two vectors, vector A and vector B, are multiplied as vector product, then the resultant of these two vectors will be magnitude of A, magnitude of P into sine of angle between the two vectors. and the direction of the resultant vector is determined by the right-hand skew rule. The product of vectors can be evaluated from the determinant like this. The example for vector product or cross product can be considered as the angular momentum. Suppose we have a body here. Consider this dot to be a particular body. This is revolving around the axis of rotation at O in the circular path. Then, if P is the linear momentum of this body and R is the distance from the axis of rotation, then angular momentum will be equal to R cross P. Here R is a vector, P is a vector. So the cross product of two vectors will give us the resultant, that is the angular momentum, which is also a vector. The direction of the angular momentum again can be calculated from right-hand skew rule, and it will be upward. It will be in the upward direction as shown in the diagram. So this is the example for cross product of two vectors. Let us look at the field concept. What is a field? Suppose we have a bar magnet. Then we know that around this magnet, we can look at the diagram here. Around this magnet, there is a region of influence. This region of influence is called magnetic field. Similarly, suppose we consider a positive charge here, then we know that around this positive charge also there is a region of influence. This region of influence is called electric field. If there is a mass, then around that mass there will be a region of influence because of its gravity. This is called gravitational field. So field can be defined as the region of influence around some source. And this field ideally extends up to infinity, but its intensity can be felt only to a limited extent. This field is a physical quantity. It can be measured and represented either by a number or a mathematical function. And this function or a number is any point in space and time. So field can be defined as a physical quantity which can be represented by a number or a function that has a value for each point in space and time. So that is field. Field can be a scalar field. What is a scalar field? Consider this example. We have a positive charge here. Around this there is, electric field. Electric field is a field which has both magnitude as well as direction. We know that around this positive charge there will be a potential also. Electrostatic potential will be there. So this we can term as potential field or electrostatic potential field around the positive charge. This electrostatic potential has only magnitude and no direction. Such type of fields which has only magnitude and no direction is called a scalar field. Another example for the scalar fields can be the variation of temperature in a room. Suppose in a room there is an AC, air conditioner, and if you switch on the AC, then we know that as the temperature from the AC source decreases, there is variation in temperature. Near to the AC, it is much cooler, and as you move far away from the source, the temperature decreases. The temperature is a bit higher. It is cooler near the AC source, and far away from the AC source, it is little bit hotter. So there is a temperature difference or gradients we call. There is a continuous variation in temperature from the source to the distance far off from the source. This variation is also an example of scalar field. The variation in temperature is an example for scalar field. Similarly, the variation of pressure or the variation in density can also be considered as an example for scalar fields. The scalar fields can be represented as surfaces also. You can see a diagram here in which field is represented in the form of a surface. We have another type of field called vector fields. if the field which is represented by either a number or a function has both magnitude as well as direction, then such a field is called vector field. So fields which has both magnitude and direction is called vector fields. Examples of vector fields can be the electric field, the magnetic field, or the velocity of water flowing in a river. You can see here there is a river, water is flowing. It has both direction as well as magnitude. The velocity has both magnitude as well as direction, so that can be considered as a vector field. Similarly, velocity vector of a rotating body can also be considered as an example for vector fields. Vector field is represented by vector lines. The best example is electrostatic, electric field or magnetic field. We saw in our previous example here. We can see here the magnetic lines of force are represented by, the magnetic fields are represented by lines of force, magnetic lines of force. This is vector lines. So vector field can be represented by vector lines. Next, del operator. What is a del operator? What is an operator basically? In mathematics, we come across operators like addition, subtraction, multiplication, integration, etc. These are called operators. We know that addition or subtraction by itself is meaningless unless we have numbers to be added or subtracted. Operator is meaningless. So operator takes meaning only in the context of numbers. Similarly, del is also an operator which we define in vector calculus. The nature of del is it resembles a vector. The mathematical form is given by I cap dou by dou x plus j cap dou by dou y plus k cap dou by dou z. Similar to other operators, del itself has no meaning at all. It doesn't make any sense. But when it acts on a certain function, it has some meaning. So this is del operator. What is a del operator? Del operator is it is an operator like any other operator we come across in mathematics. I repeat, del operator is like any other operator we come across in mathematics. By itself, it does not have any meaning. It makes sense only when it is applied on any mathematical function. The del operator resembles a vector. It is I cap dou by dou x plus j cap dou by dou y plus k cap dou by dou z. Dou or delta, you can read it either way. So this I cap delta by delta x plus j cap delta by delta y plus k cap delta by delta z is a three-dimensional version of del operator. If it is one dimension, we can consider it as just the first component I cap delta by delta x or I cap dou by dou x. Only this part is considered. This del operating on different functions has different meaning in it. We will look into the other details. Let us look at the del operator as a gradient operator. What is meant by gradient operator? Let us try to understand that with an example. Suppose we have an AC air conditioner in a room. Suppose the air conditioner is at this point in the origin, that is one end of the room. Then if AC is switched on, we know that, or we can observe that the points which are close to the AC will be at much lower temperature compared to the points which are farther away. So if you consider the line P1, P2 and P3 here and AC at the origin, the temperature will be lower at P1 compared to the temperature at line P2 and the temperature at line P3. So there is difference in temperature between these lines. This temperature can be measured on these lines as well, all along the length of this line. But assume that we have joined the temperatures which are having equal value and forming this line. That means this line represents isotherms. So P1 is an isotherm, P2 is an isotherm, P3 is an isotherm. Comparing these three isotherms, the isotherm P1 is at a lower temperature, P2 is at higher temperature, P3 is much higher temperature. So here the rate of change of temperature is increasing from P1 to P3. What is the use of del operator here? If you apply del operator as a gradient operator on the function of variation of temperature, it gives us the rate of change of temperature. Del operator gives us the rate of change of temperature, and also it gives us the direction in which the change is maximum. It gives us the direction in which the rate of temperature is maximum. This is the use of gradient operator. Hope you have understood. I repeat once again. Suppose we have an AC source here. We know that there is a temperature at various points here. If we join the temperatures of having the same value, then we get isotherms. P1, P2, and P3 are called isotherms. But between different isotherms, there is variation in temperature. P1 is at lower temperature compared to P2, and P2 is lower compared to P3. So there is gradients in temperature. There is gradual change in temperature. This can be evaluated. That is, the rate of change of temperature can be evaluated between different isotherms using gradient operator. If gradient operator is applied, the rate of change of temperature can be measured, and also it gives the rate of change of temperature in the direction in which the rate of change is maximum. This is gradient operator. Now let us look at the definition of gradient operator. The gradient operator acts on a scalar quantity and gives us the vector quantity. Here in our example, temperature is a scalar quantity, but the rate of change of temperature is in a particular direction. So that we get, it is a vector. The rate of change of temperature in a particular direction is obtained. This is a vector quantity. So gradient operates on a scalar and gives us a vector quantity. So it is defined as the gradient of a scalar field is a vector field whose magnitude is rate of change of the scalar field, and it is pointing in the direction of the greatest rate of change of the scalar field. Hope it is clear. Let us try to look at with electrodynamics part also. So what is the physical significance of this gradient? That can be again tried to understand. Let us try to understand the definition of gradient once again here. Assume we have a positive charge here, then we know that it creates a field around it. That field is a vector field. Electric field is a vector field. But there is a potential also. We can map the potential, variation of potential around this charge also. So suppose the variation of potential is marked, the line joining constant potential is plotted here. Then we get a concentric circles. We have a positive charge here. The potential is changing at various points on the around this charge. We are marking the circular circles, the concentric circles, which are the each circle represents the points which are having the same potential. So they are equipotential points. Each circle represents the equipotential points. And if you apply the del operator on the potential function, then we get the electric field. The electric field we get will give us the rate of change of potential. The electric field we get is nothing but the rate of change of potential. And what is the direction of the electric field? Electric field is a vector quantity. What is the direction of the electric field? It is in the direction of maximum change of the potential. So potential changes by maximum value along the radial lines. So this is the direction of the rate of change of potential. Is it clear? So let us consider a positive point charge. I repeat once again, let us consider a positive point charge at this point. Then there is potential change around this point. If we calculate, if we apply del operator on the potential function, we get electric field. And the electric field gives us the rate of change of potential, and it is pointing in the direction of the maximum rate of change of potential. So potential is a scalar field, electric field is a vector field. So gradient converts is the scalar field into vector fields. So that is mathematically written here as E is equal to minus delta V by delta R. This is the rate of change of potential. This is in polar coordinate system, and R cap represents the direction of the radius. It is outward. And we have minus sign here. The minus sign indicates that the potential is opposite. Potential decreases with increase in distance. In the form of, this is in the polar coordinate form. In the Cartesian representation, E can be written as minus delta V. This delta is nothing but our del operator. So del operator applied on a scalar field, that is potential, gives us the electric field, which is a vector field. So this is called the gradient of a vector field, gradient of a scalar field, and the del operator being used as a gradient operator. We will continue with our discussion on divergence, that is del being used as divergence, in our next session. Thank you.